dedicate this session to Gila because her yahrzeit was this week. I couldn't go to the cemetery because we're limited. We couldn't go out of our place, limited in distance, and so I'll try to get there tomorrow. But I also want to indicate that if anybody wants to dedicate any one of these sessions to a loved one and someone, just write me, and be happy to do so. It'll be a nice addition that we can dedicate our learning sessions to memory of someone. Any one of yours would be fine. I'll start with a quick review. We've covered the first temple period from about 1200 BCE till the destruction of the first temple. From 1200 to 1000 BCE, the Israeli conquest. Joshua and the people of Israel came into the land of Canaan. Then we moved from there into the time of the elders and the prophets, with King Saul from 1020 to 928, King Saul, King David, King Solomon. And things were pretty much united still until 928, when Israel split, the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. And that lasted till 721 BCE, when the Syrians totally destroyed the kingdom of Israel. 10 tribes were lost, and they still haven't been found. The only Jewish group left was from the area of Judah. And then from 721 to 586, that was all that was left. Judah, which was then destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BCE. And then through the Jewish story, not the Israel story, but the general Jewish story now starts to happen in the diaspora, not in Israel, even though it seems to be anti-Zionistic. But the diaspora really is where, for the next 1500 years, Babylonia is really the center of Jewish life. From the Babylonian exile, when Jews were brought in as slaves, after many have been massacred, they really rebuilt themselves there, and were very productive. In fact, we have the Babylonian Talmud to this day. That's where it comes from. So for 1500 years, until the Gaonic period, the end of the Gaonic period, Jewish history really flourishes, and so on, not in Israel, outside during this period. But things are happening during this period, which is what we're covering, which was the Second Temple period. The Second Temple period begins, remember, from 586 and 538 begins the Second Temple period, not that many years. And that short time, the Babylonian Jews have risen from slaves, from people totally destroyed, their whole lives, everything that they knew taken away, but they rebuilt themselves quite well. But in 538, a new empire comes into existence. It is the Persian Empire now. The Persian Empire becomes probably the largest empire in the ancient world. Conquers Egypt, conquers the whole Middle East, basically, India, all the way up to the Indus River. And the Second Temple period lasts until the next empire. No empire lasts forever, which would be the Greeks and Hellenists and Alexander the Great. From 583 to 332, we have the Persian period, and the Second Temple period is part of that. In the Second Temple period, what happens is Cyrus and the Persians have a whole different philosophy of how to hold their empire together. And the view of Cyrus, who was Koresh, who many Jews claimed is the Messiah, because what he did was the philosophy was to hold this vast empire together. The philosophy was to let each area keep its practices, its religious practices, its ethical, its cultural, ethnic practices. Let them be in charge of their own place. Just one thing we want the tribute, and we want to make sure there's no politics involved, no independence involved. You are vassals, and so on. So the way to assure that is to basically focus on allowing the religious groups, the high priest and the Kohanim of the temple, let them be in charge of tax collection. Whoever collects taxes, in charge of taxes, also has an army behind them from the empire to make sure that the tribute comes in. And the other requirement is that when you're needed for a military and called up, you have to supply the military people and to be part of the army in case there's a war, an expansion of the empire, whatever it may be. And so it's a quiet. We don't have too many sources during that period, actually. No, not too many written sources, not too many outside sources. The size of Israel is limited. The northern part of Israel is maybe, if I get into my car, I can, in about 35 minutes, I come to the northern part called the city of Beth El. And that was the northern border. It's like going from Silver Spring to Montgomery Mall. That's the north. And if you come to Beth El, you want to come to that borderline, you have an overlook. You can go over and see over into the Palestinian area, a mound, which is the place where Jacob had his dream. That's in Beth El. At the western part of the boundary was a place called Gezer. Now, if you remember, Gezer was a fortress built by King Solomon in the Bible. And that's like between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv is this place. If you're on the highway going from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv, you can see this mound, which was a fortress at one time. And that was the western boundary. Maybe another half-hour drive from Jerusalem, let's say from my house, if there's not too much traffic. Traffic in Israel is impossible. Not only the drivers are impossible. You know, when you drive in Israel, what happens is everyone speeds. Everyone beeps their horns. If you think listening to horns beeping all the time in America is a bother, everybody beeps. The littlest thing, you hear beeping, 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 beeping. And no one gives you a break. Everyone's it's such aggressive drivers. And if someone's driving and they pass you, they'll signal after they pass you, as though to say, gotcha, you know. So let's say, assuming I don't have all that difficulty and the traffic is so hard, and the cities were ancient cities, so the streets were small, and so there's no cars. Cars are parked on the sidewalk, so there's no place to walk sometimes because the cars are parked there. You can't blame them; they have no other place. They're working on expanding these streets and building light rail. There's all kinds of construction now going on, which is creating even more of a traffic headache. But in a few years, it'll be wonderful. Jerusalem, especially, is going to be a big city, unquestionably. They're building now 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 stories high building, whereas before it was only 8 or 9 stories. By law of British mandate, and it's really growing very rapidly. In any case, that was the western boundary. The eastern boundary was the city of Jericho, I can't go there now because that's also in the Palestinian territory. And the southern boundary was a place called pt4. pt4 is just a little bit north of where Hebron is, and Hebron is the place where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are buried. And we'll see that later on when we come to Herod. So that's the boundary. The Negev, the whole Negev, the south, are occupied by Edomites, and most of the northern part in Samaria were occupied by the Samaritans. We'll see them again a little bit later. So that's a small area. So there's not much to govern. And the people there are farmers, mostly. The Jews who are living there are farmers. Not the ones that all the educated people were taken out of Israel and brought to Babylonia as slaves at the beginning, and all the businessmen and so on were all brought out. So who was left were the poorer elements and the farmers. It was just a poor agrarian economy. And so we don't have too much sources going on here, except what the historians and archaeologists don't do is they don't look into Jewish sources, because in the Jewish sources, other things are going on. And we saw that in the Mishnah, dealing with the ethics of the fathers, Pirkei Avot, that talks about the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, the men of the great sages of the great assembly, because there's a revolution going on here, which affects us today. And also the two biblical books of Ezra and Nehemiah, the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, describe this period. Those are the only, we don't have no other sources. Josephus also talks about it, but otherwise there's no, we don't have too many sources. Only two sources to have if you go to the old city, to Jerusalem, and you go to the city of David, where they take you around to show you the walls and around the city. Then they'll show you what Nehemiah did was he restored the walls around the city of David. And remember, as I told you, in ancient times, you needed to have a city. That's your security. That's your insurance for protection. You need a wall around where you can go at night to sleep, and in daytime you go out to the fields to work. But you need to, because you constantly have more raiders, you have tribes attacking you and so on. So you need the security of staying behind a wall. So, which is why walls are always built around all these cities. Nehemiah, by the way, was one of those, the Babylonian, who became, worked himself up from a slave to becoming an advisor to the emperor, to the Persian emperor. Imagine that. And Nehemiah wants to come back, but he's a Jew by heart, and he wants to come back, and he wants to rebuild Jerusalem. He wants to rebuild the city of David. He wants to rebuild Judea. And he convinces the king to allow him to come to spend a couple of years. He nudges him and nudges him and nudges him. And finally, Darius, now as the king, he permits him to go and sends with him not only a small little army with him, but helps him fund and checks and sees that and checks the history of the situation, which Nehemiah tells Darius. He tells, look, your father Cyrus, when he conquered the area, he wrote this decree. It's called the Cyrus Cylinder Decree, saying that he wants to encourage those Jews from Babylonia who want to return to rebuild their land, to go back to rebuild their temple, not their land, to go and rebuild their temple, to set up their high priesthood, and uh, and rule their area their way. Because don't forget, if you're a pagan, there's no problem. If only a monotheist has a problem if you have one God, you can't accept anyone else. But a pagan, what's the difference to him? So he has one God. So if he needs another God, he'll put another God on his mantelpiece. And he has another God, a second God, and a third, a fourth. It makes no difference to him. I mean, he's serious about it. But since there's no one overriding deity here, you don't have the same problem like we have with Islam and Christianity and Judaism, and which is monotheistic religions. There's no room one for the other. Just have to either learn to live somehow. You have to learn to make accommodations to live together. But it's much easier, and that's what Cyrus's philosophy was. So he saw this. It was in the records, and he saw it. So he let Nehemiah go, and Ezra, who was probably a Kohen, came also, and Ezra was a simple individual. He didn't want to come with an army. He didn't want to come with any letters of introduction. He wanted to come as an individual and wanted to have an influence based on his personality. And Nehemiah came based on his influence and the power that he had. So Nehemiah, as a result of that, was able to construct a wall, and any opposition for people who are against these people coming in, these new Babylonians, not too many, maybe about 40,000 or so. The most stayed back in Bavel and Babylonia. They were building their lives there and building a community there, and institutions were being built there. But about 42,000 or so came with them, and there was opposition from the old Jews who were living there. These new people are coming in. They're coming in with wealth and with influence and power. They're going to tell us what to do and how to do, and disturb our lives. So at the beginning, they opposed it, and the Samaritans heavily opposed it. Because they weren't accepted as Jews. You'll see in a moment why. But Nehemiah said, makes no difference. We're going to do it. I have the power and the influence. And indeed, it is Nehemiah who restores the walls of the old city. The Ezra, on the other hand, has a different kind of influence. He has to. He has Jews now who have a very thin connection to their heritage and their traditions, and he wants to rebuild it. And by dint of his personality, and also by now emphasizing the education and the study of Torah. The Talmud talks about, outside the Talmud you don't have it, but the Talmud talks about the Takanot of Ezra, that Ezra makes certain decrees, sets up this Anshe Knesset Gedolah of sages, and makes a bunch of decrees. Don't forget now, this is going to be a theocratic leadership. So they introduce the Shabbat, and they have the power to make sure everybody observes the Sabbath. They're going to introduce all kinds of laws. The Sabbath, by the way, was forgotten pretty much. He brings it back. He starts Torah reading days, Mondays and Thursdays, so that during market days. They institute a court system, so there'll be fairness and so on. He does away with slavery. He does away with, and also he does away with the fact that rich landowners outside still own the land. He does away with any mortgages that people owned who couldn't afford to keep their property are canceled. And there was a lot of intermarriage, and you can see that those marriages were not really love marriages, but marriages of convenience, because a lot of the people were very happy to get divorced when he said to them, you can't be married, you shouldn't be married to a Moabite or an Edomite or whatever, wherever you are. So, excuse me a second. Moshe, let me call you back. I'm in class, okay? Sorry. And so there was a lot of divorce at the time as well. But if you look at it very carefully, you can see that the marriages weren't hot to begin with. But in any case, people followed it. And so, and also the most important thing Ezra did was now to make the Torah and the study of Torah a central part of Judaism. And now you don't have to be a high priest anymore. You don't have to be a Kohen anymore in order to rise in influence. But through becoming a sage or a scholar of the Torah, you can earn your respect and become a member of the Anshe Knesset Gdolah, which is now the people that are making a lot of decisions as to how they should operate. And so now you have the beginnings of, you have to ask yourself the question, what's more important, Torah study or the temple? Now, it's true, we still talk about the temple, but that's an ideal. But the Torah study becomes now an important aspect of Judaism as well. And so that comes to us through Ezra. And if you notice, at least archaeologically speaking, all the synagogues, the earliest synagogues that have been excavated, were not places of prayer. They were mostly places where people came together to study Torah. Only later did prayer become the dominant place for a synagogue. But originally, it was all the synagogues originally were, at least the early ones, were places where people came to study Torah. And so it's the whole question of how prayer develops in Judaism is something that has to be studied as well, but that's not for us. Any case, outside of that, we don't have nothing else seems to be happening for like over 200 years. But Persian Empire doesn't stay long. What comes after the Persian Empire? Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great comes along now. And then this young man, this conquers the universe at the time. He defeats the Persians, and he comes now and conquers Egypt and the whole Middle East and so on. And he's coming down to down the middle where Israel is in the Fertile Crescent. The connection, and don't forget, every empire, this is where the Jews Israel gets stuck. It's the main road for connecting the main empires, which is an Egyptian and the Mesopotamian. And between the two is Israel that has all the roads that connect the two. So where all the trade that between these groups are going on has to go through Israel. All the wars between these groups have to go through Israel. All the empires who want to conquer, everyone wants to conquer Egypt. Egypt wants to conquer everybody in the Middle East. And in order to get there, guess what? They have to go through Egypt. So Nebuch, little Israel, gets stuck right in the middle. Every place there's a war. Every place there's trade going on. Every place there's a battle going on. Every place where fighting is going on between empires and so on and so forth. Nebuch, everybody wants to conquer these roads. That's the connection. You can't go from Africa, Asia, Europe, unless you go through Europe. Don't forget, they don't have airplanes at the time. They don't have boats, ships at the time. You have to go through the roads. Israel is there. That's why Israel gets stuck with all these. The only advantage is that so you're going to have the Greek Empire. After the Greeks, you're going to have the early Romans, and then you're going to have the Byzantines, which is really Roman also, just eastern part of Rome. And then you're going to have the Arab Empire. You notice, unlike what the Arabs are saying, they don't exist yet. They're not here. They don't have a temple. They don't have a mosque there. There's nothing. The Arab Empire, the Crusaders, and then so on. So all these, everybody wants to go through Israel till modern times. So it's the main highway for everything. So now Alexander is coming, and he's conquers this empire. And what happens? We don't know what happened. He doesn't destroy Jerusalem. Every empire comes and they all and with their conquests, they destroy cities, massacres, take slaves and sell them on the slave market. That's a wonderful way of making money. You can take thousands and thousands of people, sell them on the slave market, because that's how ancient economies operate. They operate with slaves. They couldn't exist without slaves. So this is part of the economy, like it or not. So they massacre people. They plunder. That's a wonderful way of paying your soldiers. You let them plunder, and whatever they could take for themselves, spoils they keep. It's theirs. And a lot of times, these groups of soldiers are garrisoned in these areas, and they settle down there, and it becomes their home, becomes their property, and so on. So, but Alexander the Great comes, and the Midrash gives a story. I don't know if it's true or not. Shimon HaTzadik, who was in our Mishnah, the second Mishnah, if you read it carefully, in Ethics of the Fathers, Shimon HaTzadik was the high priest, and evidently toward the end of the Persian period, and evidently times were good. The crops were good, the economy was good. Israel was trading oil, a lot of olive oil, wine. They have some of the most wonderful grapes in the area, wine, grapes, olive oil, and also cloth, and so on. So agriculturally, things were prosperous during his time. He was the high priest as well, the Kohen Gadol in charge, and he evidently was a very special human being. So much so that he's buried not far from here actually, it's in the eastern part of Jerusalem, the Arab area, although it's part of Jerusalem, but the eastern part is where most of the Arabs live. And there is a grave with a monument there, a whole building. And before 1967, that was the most places that people went to, rather than going to now we go to the wall, but they went to the grave of Shimon HaTzadik. Most tourists Jewish tourists went to the grave of Shimon HaTzadik. That all changed. Very few people go there. First, it's not the safest place to go, but secondly, now we have the Kotel and so on, 667. So that's changed. So Shimon HaTzadik, and went to meet Alexander, the Midrash says, to try to convince him not to attack Jerusalem. And when he met him, the Midrash says Alexander got off his horse and he bowed down to him. And everyone was wondering what's going on. You bowed into this old man with a beard. What is going on? And Alexander, now I don't know if this is true or not, maybe a legend, whatever. But Alexander said, in all my battles, before I went to battle, I would have a dream, and I would see a man, an elderly man with a beard, looked just like you. And every time I saw him in my dream, I knew I would be victorious. And as a result of that, he said, I'm finally meeting you. You were in my dreams, and I will not destroy Jerusalem, and I will not attack Jerusalem. And Judea was not attacked at that time. Is it a legend? I don't know. But I know this, that the Talmud says that year, the next year, in gratitude, every firstborn son that was born in Judea was called Alexander. And that's where we get the Jewish name. That's how Alexander becomes a Jewish name as a result of that. Sandor, Sandy, and so on are all from Alexander from that time on. But anyway, Alexander the Great, however, dies a year later, and his empire is divided up into three parts by three of his generals taking control. One part takes Greece. The one that we're concerned with is the other two parts. One part, Egypt and Libya, is taken by Ptolemy Soter. The second general who takes the northern part, Syria, Turkey, Iraq, probably, that whole area is the Seleucid Empire, but because the general first general who was king of that area was a general in Alexander's army. Those two areas, those two empires now, the empire of Ptolemy, the empire of the Seleucids, one in the south, Egypt, one in the north will focus Syria, although Turkey is included there too, so on, are fighting for control. Who's going to be in charge? Who's going to conquer the area? And guess who's in the middle? Israel, because they're right between and all the wars. So at first, the victors seem to be the Ptolemies. And by the way, the last Ptolemy is going to be Cleopatra. So I think the movie is coming out. But anyway, she's the last of the Ptolemies in terms of his line. So, but about 300 BCE, the Ptolemies conquer most of Israel. They don't conquer the Seleucids, but they defeat them, and so they have control. And the Ptolemies happen to be very interesting. On the one hand, they fostered Hellenism strongly on Israel. They set up what's called a police, which is the technical term for a Hellenistic state. The Hellenism is the combination of Greek philosophy, Aristotle, Plato, the literature, and so on of Greece, and Eastern thoughts and in Eastern culture. It combines the two. So it's pagan, and they have every one of these cities has a gym. Now, a gym is not a gymnasium, not like our gymnasiums. That's the place you go to be men mostly. You go naked and you build up your body, because the body in Hellenism has to be strong and healthy and beautiful. That's the place you learn to become a warrior. So it's the place where you have sexual encounters, men, women. There's no difference. So these are the gymnasiums areas that are set up for that purpose, and mostly to prepare you to become a warrior and to build up your body. The body is adorned to build theaters, and so all these things I'm talking about are actually uncovered, and archaeologically there are all kinds of cities that became like this, that you can see these places. You can see it in Beit Shan, you can see it in Ashkelon, you can see it all along the coast. All these places are available to us. We can see the theaters, the hippodromes. All of these things are found and can be seen. But the Ptolemies, on the other hand, respected learning, and the Jews from Egypt, who were brought originally as slaves, again by conquest, also did what the Babylonian Jews did. They had reconstructed and rebuilt themselves. And Alexandria basically became a world capital of learning in the ancient world. And they had the best library scrolls. In those days, you had scrolls and not books of all the world. And it was the Ptolemies also who brought the 70 sages from Judea and had them all, each one sitting in a different room, each one translating the Bible. Don't forget, our Bible was canonized by Ezra. I forgot to mention that. 24 books in the Bible that we have today, our Bible, was during time of Ezra and Nehemiah in the Persian period. But the Ptolemies wanted to translate it into Greek, because Greek was the universal language pretty much at the time. And so they brought these 70 sages, and they each one translated, and they found that each translation came out to be the same. So they said it must be correct, and that was called the Septuagint. And that's important because the Septuagint has an impact on the development of Christianity and the way that Christianity understands the Bible through the Septuagint. So our Bible then becomes through this translation of 70 sages, becomes the book called the Septuagint, and becomes then transformed into Christianity, and is used by Christianity to this day as their place to go to for our Bible. However, the Ptolemies don't last long, because about 100 years later, in 200, they are defeated by the Seleucids. They're defeated in the northern part of Israel, in a place called the Banyas. I don't know if any of you have been in Banyas. Originally, it was called the Panyas, but in Arabic, they don't have a P sound. Their P is a B, so it's turned into the Banyas. It's all the way up. That's where the major battle occurred, where the Seleucids won and defeated the Ptolemies, and then took over the whole land of Israel, made them into vassals. The Seleucids at this place, the Banyas. Now I'll tell you about this place, the Banyas, way up in the north. It's a beautiful place. There's vegetation, greenery all year round. There are streams of water flowing. It's at the bottom of the Hermon mountain range. It's one of the areas which supplies the main water for the Jordan. The Jordan River starts around that area. The Banyas and the Don riverbed and the Hasbani River. So these are three riverbeds that form the Jordan River. And the Jordan River used to be a huge river, but now they siphon, as I mentioned, they siphon the water off to use for agricultural purposes. By the time it gets down further, it's just a little creek, like Sligo Creek. But that's because the water is being siphoned off and used for agriculture, for water, for drinking water, for all kinds of stuff, dammed up in all kinds of areas. So now it's just a very small little creek. But from the Banyas, you can really see there's water flowing, there are waterfalls there, and so on. It's really quite an area. The Banyas also is a place where a lot of tourists come, Christian tourists, because according to the New Testament, the book of, I think it's Matthew, no, Mark. I don't know. I think the book of Matthew uh, 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 says that that's where Jesus, for the first time, and we'll learn about that when we come to the Byzantine period, that Jesus, for the first time, uh, revealed himself to Peter as a Messiah, that he's the Messiah. So Christians, a lot of Christians come there. It's called Banyas from Panyas because of the Panyas is from Pan. Pan was some kind of Greek god. The word Pan, it means a goat, a dancing goat. So there was some kind of belief in this dancing goat, and there was a temple to this dancing goat. It's called, and that's where Pan comes from, in the Banyas in his name. And also that's the place where later on Herod is going to build a Roman temple, as well with Zeus there too. So all that is around at this place, the Panyas. I had when I was there, I saw for the first time a sabra. A sabra is a fruit, and I said, "Oh, I was so excited!" I grabbed my hand, and I pulled it out, and then when I took it out, I had these thistles stuck in my fingers, and I couldn't get it out. I was trying to rub them off; it wouldn't come off, and I was trying to wash them in the water. It couldn't come off. I said, Samir, what am I doing? I said to Gila at the time, it was a few years ago, I said to Gila, I'm going to stuck the rest of my life. These things will never come out. I can't pick them out. I can't rub them out. What am I going to do? So then someone said, here's the way to do it. You take some earth and you rub your hands with earth that come off. So shoot, I finally got those thistles out of my hand. That's the last time I picked up a sabra by myself. Anyway, at that place, the Seleucids defeat the Ptolemies and defeat the Egyptians, and they turn into Israel into a vassal of the Seleucids. Now comes a whole different philosophy. I'll end soon. A whole different philosophy. The Seleucids begin with Antiochus III, who's very nice to the Jews. He just conquered them. He's assured them everything will be fine. Just pay the tribute, the taxes. We'll let you stay the way you are. His son, though, after he died, his son, Antiochus IV, is called Antiochus Epiphanes, which means he considers himself a god. And but a lot of people laughed at him too. They called him Epimanes. Epimanes means a madman. So he was mad, and what he wanted to do was unite his empire. And the way he's going to unite his empire by making everyone culturally and religiously the same. And if you make everybody the same, then it'll be easier to run such an empire, and you won't have people trying to revolt against you. You won't have people trying to fight against you, and so on, because it'll be all one. And that's what he attempts to do in Israel. And he does not succeed because it's very difficult to make Jews into pagans. And also, but what he does is he places on the temple the Temple Mount. He makes a pagan temple out of it with Zeus as the god. He does not permit the observance of Sabbath. He does not permit circumcision. He does not permit all the laws. Doesn't permit Torah study. He doesn't permit Jewish prayer, and he tries to force Hellenistic way of life onto Israel. That then begins a revolt. in place of Modi'in, a little village at the time. Uh, uh, he tries to make the Israelites offer sacrifices to him, and offer sacrifices in general using pigs, which would not be acceptable for the Jews. And so in the place of Modin, they had this meeting and an altar, and they called the people together, and they tried to make them offer a sacrifice to the king, in honor of the king, and so on, to use a pig. At that point, Mattathias rises up against him, and they begin. He and his 5 sons start a revolt against all of this. We know the story of Hanukkah from here, and the Seleucids sent an army down to try to pull down the revolt, and the one who's in charge is his 3rd son, Judah, Yehuda HaMaccabee. Now this is around, now we come to about 166 BCE. Judah Maccabee is from 166 to 60 is in charge basically now. And the man was a brilliant tactician. Here he is fighting an army, well equipped, trained, so on, with farmers, people who are not there don't know anything about fighting in war, but he has these tactics which are used, I'm told, in West Point and all the academies. A lot of the tactics that he used are used in training of generals and in the military books. He has these brilliant with such a small group. He's able to defeat large armies, well trained and so on, by tactics that he uses, and defeat the Seleucid armies. One major battle was here in it's called now Canadian Park, and it's not far from here, maybe 15-20 minutes from here. And there was a major battle, and the tactics that he used at that point were so brilliant that every book on how to fight wars includes within it his tactics. All right. So in any case, he's able to become victorious, and rededicates the temple and so on. We have the story of Hanukkah, which you are all aware of. We don't have to go into it. But Israel is still not an independent state. It's still not independent because he's now got the temple, but in 160 BCE, in the Battle of pt4, which is right north of Hebron, he really lost that battle, and in that battle he was killed. He was killed, and his brother Jonathan, then took control. Jonathan was a different kind of person. He was a warrior. They had to become warriors, fighting guerrilla war, basically. But he was a brilliant diplomat, and trying to use inside the Seleucid Empire now, they've got troubles. Who's going to succeed, who's going to conquer, which generals wants to take over, and so on. And Jonathan is constantly moving his allegiance to one side or another, and in doing so, gains a little bit more property, more land for Israel as a reward. Except for one thing, sometimes, he ruled from between 160 to 142. But the problem with Jonathan was that At one point, he was lured for a diplomatic meeting with a general called Tryphon, and he was moved to Akko, the city of Akko, and it was a ploy to get him there, and they murdered him there. So sometimes being too smart doesn't pay. His brother then, Simon, takes control. All these are high priests. He's in control now. Simon, from 142 to 134. And he receives, something else happens for the first time. Before, the religious leaders were not political leaders, but now Simon receives the title of ethnarch, which means he's in charge. He's a political leader as well, not only the high priest of the temple. Simon, during his time, things were pretty good. He increases the area of Israel slowly. The Hasmoneans now are increasing the area that was in Israel control. But his son-in-law, of all people, murders him. So these Hasmoneans, not as wonderful as they are, and so on and so forth, were also, sometimes cruel and so on. There was a tough time. Simon and two of his sons are murdered by the son-in-law. But he had a third son, John Hyrcanus, who then pursues and takes over from the son-in-law, who then had to escape, and he's not heard from ever again. So who knows what happened to him. And now this third son, who survived, John Hyrcanus, from 134 to 104, he really expands the area of Israel. And what he does, he conquers the southern part of the Negev, where the Udumians were. And this is important because first he forces them to convert to Judaism. And in addition to that, he destroys the Samaritans and the Samaritan temple in Mount Gerizim that we talked about. Who were these Samaritans? The Samaritans were brought in, remember, by the Assyrians, and they adopted some of the practices of Judaism. They did not have an oral law. They kept the Bible that they have is in Old Hebrew. In other words, in the ancient Canaanite script. During the Persian Empire, Ezra also did this. He changed the Hebrew script to our script that we have today, because it was easier for people to read, since Aramaic was the universal language, and the script is the same thing as the Aramaic script that he introduced. But the Samaritans kept the old script for their Torah. They don't have the entire Bible as we have. They only have the 5 books of Moses in the old script. They didn't believe in the oral tradition, and they believed that the holy temple was in Mount Gerizim, not in Jerusalem, and so it turned into, and it's a whole different religion basically. They started out as a sect, but they became a whole different religion. We'll see that happen with Christianity also. Christianity starts as a sect, and then it becomes its own religion and conquers the world. But Samaritans never conquered the world, but they turned into from a Jewish group into a sect that was totally not Jewish anymore. In any case, John Hyrcanus conquers Samaria as well, and he's truly an empire. But by time he dies, Israel is pretty much what it was like under King David and Solomon. So he has achieved that, but he's a kind of cruel person. He very, very difficult person, and not necessarily loved by the Jews. Anyway, after his death, his son Alexander Yanai becomes now the head, and he takes on for the first time the title of king. We're almost done. The title of king, and he is now ruling because Egypt has got problems. The Seleucid Empire has got problems within, and every time these people have problems within, Israel has its independence. So the first time he rules as king, he's also the high priest, and he again is a very suppressive, cruel ruler of his time. He had slaughtered a lot of the rabbis. He had them all killed off because they opposed some of his ways. And at his finally, when he dies, his wife, he told his wife, "Gee, I'm sorry I did all this." She was going to take now control because Shlom Tzion, Alexandra was his wife, and after his death, she became the leader in a sense, and the ruler. And it was a wonderful period. Maybe that's an example of women should become the leaders. During her time, I think for about 10 years, life was good in Israel. And her brother was Shimon ben Shetach, known in the Talmud constantly. And she restored sense of peace. The Sadducees were fighting with the Pharisees. She brought them all together and so on. And but after her death, she has two sons. Were fighting with each other. One was name is Aristobulus, and one was named let me see my notes here. Hyrcanus. Aristobulus was a cruel individual. The people complained terribly. What happened though at this time? Something else happened, because we're going to leave it here. Pompey and the Romans have come. The beginning of the Roman Empire in the Middle East and in Israel. And Pompey conquers the Seleucids. And Pompey is moving and basically is now in charge of the whole land of Israel. And meantime, what's happening inside Israel is that people are going to Pompey, who sets up his office in Syria, and complain about the cruelty of Aristobulus. He's overtaxing them. He's forcing this and forcing that on them, and you got to get rid of him. He's now, you're in charge. This is we're your vassals now. We can't take him as a leader. Get rid of him. And Hyrcanus, his brother, was a different kind of personality. He was easygoing. He was calm. When his brother took charge, so let him be in charge. But Hyrcanus has an advisor. His name is Antipater. Antipater was a Edomian, one of the family who was forced to convert to Judaism. A brilliant man, evidently. And he kept pushing Hyrcanus. He says, now's your chance to get in. Now's your chance to, why are you sitting back? If people complaining, let's go to Pompey also, and let's tell him that you should be you're the older brother, you should be in charge. So he says, all right. So Hyrcanus goes. It's not enough that you're just a high priest. You should be the king here. What is your problem? So they go to Pompey, and Pompey hears, and Pompey is a smart man. He figures he's better off with Hyrcanus than Aristobulus. Aristobulus is too strong. He's too independent. He's too cruel. He does what he wants. This Hyrcanus fellow is good. So he assigns Hyrcanus as the charge of the high priest and king. and Antipater as his main advisor. And Antipater then takes one of his sons. His name is Herod, and he appoints him as the governor of the Galilee of the North. And we're going to leave that for next time because we've come to the story of Herod, and almost everything you find in Israel is Mad Herod, the cruelest of the cruel. The guy is sick as anything, but he's a brilliant builder. And almost anything and everything you find in Israel today is going to be from Herod. I don't know, maybe madness and greatness all come together, cruelty and that, but when we come to Herod, we'll see all the places that he builds, and including the temple as we know it today, including the wall as we know it today, including all these fortresses and cities and so on that we have today. And that will bring us into the end of the first period of Herod. And next time we'll cover Herod, the revolt against the Romans, destruction of the Second Temple, the Bar Kokhba revolt, and then the beginning of the Byzantine Empire, which is the second part of the Roman Empire. And there you can invite your Christian friends, because for the next 300 years or so, the Byzantines are going to turn Israel into a museum of Christianity, of all the sites that Jesus was, the birth of Christianity, which is Jewish. It's all Jewish, but it's going to be in that area. They're the ones that are going to turn Israel into the Holy Land. Up till now, you'll never find Israel defined in the Bible as the Holy Land. It's the good land, the land of milk and honey, and so on. But the Holy Land becomes because the Byzantines made it into an area, a pilgrimage area, where people came from all over as pilgrims. And the first tourist trade basically starts from there. And that will take us then into the Arabs, then finally get there. And then once we get through the Byzantines and the Arabs, we'll understand what the modern problems are. But right to now, if you notice, then there are no Christians and no Muslims and no Islam and nothing. It's just us caught in the middle, as we always have been. Any questions?